AEW and New Japan's cross-promotional pay-per-view Forbidden Door has finally happened, and it was pretty successful both financially and with fans. But even with it doing as good as it did, could this dream card be even dreamier? Well, I say yes, as this pay-per-view wasn't booked exactly the way I would do it. How would I do it? Well, that's the subject of this episode, because today... Okay, so full disclosure, I didn't see the actual pay-per-view. Now, don't think that I'm going to be criticizing a pay-per-view that I didn't even see, or that I'm knocking New Japan or AEW themselves, as I'm really talking about the hype and the build-up and the marketing for the show rather than the event itself, and that is something that I did experience. However, this begs the question, why didn't I see this pay-per-view, and what is this video going to be all about? Well, the answer to both those things is that I thought the pay-per-view was rather pricey for what they were offering, and there was nothing that I saw going into the show that really sparked my interest to justify the price tag. So this video is all about what it would have taken for me to pony up the dough and watch the show. Oh, and might I point out that with a reported $6 million being made for the show, I highly doubt that anyone was missing my money. I'm just saying that this is what I personally would like to have seen, for whatever that's worth. And you don't have to agree, nobody's judging you for it. Oh, and also, I'll be breaking down this video into two parts. The first is going to be me talking about the show, dealing with what AEW and New Japan had to work with, meaning taking things like injuries into account. But then, stick around to the end of the video where I'll be talking about a card that would have been done in an ideal world where injuries weren't a thing. Anyway, with all that being said, let's get into the video. Okay, so for this portion of the video, I'm going to be booking a card that realistically could have happened. Now, I'll mostly be working with wrestlers that actually did wrestle on the show, but there are going to be a few that didn't quite make the cut. And to the best of my knowledge, there's nothing preventing any of the wrestlers that I picked from being on the show itself. However, if there was something like an injury or being a part of AAA that I didn't know about, well, I apologize in advance. But anyway, with all that being said, let's go to our curtain jerk match. Okay, so to be clear, I'm not putting any matches on the pre-show, I'm going right into the main card. And I think one of the best ways to start the show off is with Haruki Goto. And if we look at the real Forbidden Door pay-per-view, we'll see that Goto was a go-to to start the night off as well, seeing that he was on the pre-show. And as a former IWGP Intercontinental Champion and a winner of the G1 Climax amongst many other accolades, of course he'd be a great way to start this show off right. But that leaves the question, who exactly should this powerhouse go against? Well, we do have several options, like Wardlow. Here's another big man who's clearly being groomed for AEW's main event, and with that, a win over Goto would be absolutely great for his career. However, as much as I would like to see this match, there is one that I want to see just a little bit more, and that would be Haruki Goto versus Keith Lee. Now, this is a really close call, and even though AEW really isn't booking him in this direction, I still think that a matchup between the two of them would be something that I couldn't pass on, especially when you consider both men's prowess with both strength and agility. This would be a fantastic showing, and what a wonderful way to start a pay-per-view off proper. Okay, so to follow that Haas fight, next I'm going to be looking to get into a little bit of aerial assault. And when it comes to the high-flying game, it's hard to do better than Will Ospreay. Now yes, Keith Lee does of course take to the sky too, but Will Ospreay is in another category of high flyer. And while the actual Forbidden Door pay-per-view did see Will Ospreay go against Orange Cassidy, this isn't a matchup that I personally was looking forward to, as I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense. Even though I fully acknowledge that both men are fantastic wrestlers, and I heard they put on a great match. But don't worry, I will be getting to Orange Cassidy in just a little bit. Now, in my estimation, there are plenty of AEW talents that I would just love to see Will Ospreay go against, such as the muscular high flyer of Pac. Although, as much as I would enjoy seeing that match, there is one other that I'm going with instead, and that would be Will Ospreay versus Sammy Guevara, as I see Sammy as a young Will Ospreay in a lot of different ways, which is something I would like to see them develop into the story of the match and into the feud itself. But don't get me wrong, at Forbidden Door 2, Pac and Ospreay would be up next. While I did say that I don't think that Will Ospreay and Orange Cassidy is necessarily the matchup that I would go with, I still do feel that Cassidy should be on this card. But I say he's better suited in a comedy match with another comedic wrestler. And after the last 2 matches, a bit of comedy does also help to change it up. Now, if we're gonna take AEW's Orange Cassidy, a comedic wrestler who is also good at the wrestling too, well, who is there in New Japan who also fits that bill? Well, I for one say Toru Yano would be my ideal choice to go against Orange Cassidy. But an honorable mention to the funky weapon Taguchi, as he also would have been really great in this match too. Alright, so after a lighthearted match, now I think it's time for something rough and gritty with a straight up brawl, and that's gonna happen between 2 guys who really know how to handle themselves in a fight, Minoru Suzuki and Hook. And this is also going to serve as a good way to get Hook on pay-per-view, as I feel that he's highly underutilized for his mainstream potential. I appreciate the slow build and all, but I think now his time has come. And now, let's continue to shake things up by going into some tag team action. And this is going to be the first match from the Forbidden Door pay-per-view that I'm actually keeping for my dream pay-per-view as well. And that's FTR going against the United Empire and Roppongi Vice. As the idea of FTR winning the IWGP Tag Team titles is just too awesome for me. Although, don't get me wrong, seeing FTR going against Guerrillas of Destiny wouldn't be the worst idea either. And now, it's time for the second match from the actual pay-per-view that I'll be keeping here as well, as next up we have Zack Sabre Jr. versus Claudio Castagnoli. This is a dream matchup for me, something that I really want to see, and I hope I do get to watch this match one day. I'm sure I will sooner or later. But the only thing I would change is that I wouldn't keep Claudio surprise, even though I do know it makes for a fantastic pop when you keep somebody a secret. But remember, the purpose of this video is talking about how both companies could have gotten me to buy the pay-per-view, and advertising the former Cesaro would be a fantastic way to do that. In fact, that alone might have gotten the job done. Okay, so following up what I'm sure was a technical masterpiece, it's time to go into another brawl. And with that, I'm going to be picking someone that I feel should have been higher up on the card, and that's Eddie Kingston. Kingston has been treated like an absolute star, and his trajectory is leading him to some great things, so why not bump him up a little bit later in the show? And while I do know that they're setting up the Combat Club to go against the Inner Circle, the Jericho Appreciation Society, in War Games, Blood and Guts, personally, I would sidestep that for this pay-per-view, as it's supposed to be a cross-promotional show that's all about dream matches. And also, I think Blood and Guts and Forbidden Door should have more room between them and shouldn't be going back to back. And furthermore, when it comes to Eddie Kingston, my personal dream match for him would be going against the Unchained Gorilla of Togi Makabe. These 2 wrestlers would have an all-out war, and when it comes to hyping up Blood and Guts, well, if it had to happen on the next episode of Dynamite, well, if you hadn't done it sufficiently by then, well, as far as I'm concerned, you were never going to. Okay, so now we get to the top of the card, and this is where I'm going to start playing around with things a little bit, as I'm taking a match that was on the real show and just paring it down. Because if it was up to me, I would have the IWGP World Heavyweight Championship be a one-on-one contest between champion Jay White and Adam Cole. And while I haven't been talking about who I would choose to go over in any of these matches, I do have something to say about this and the next bout. Since, believe it or not, I would have Adam Cole go over and become the new IWGP World Heavyweight Champion. Now don't get me wrong, if Okada was still wearing that belt, this wouldn't be the case. It's only the way it goes because Jay White is the one holding the strap. Oh, and also because, well, let's just get into the next match I have on my card. Because, following that, for the interim AEW World Championship, I would have this match be between Hiroshi Tanahashi and Adam Page. And stylistically, I think this is a much better pairing than Tanahashi and Moxley. And furthermore to that, I would have Tanahashi win. Having the ace of New Japan win the interim AEW World Championship and having an AEW wrestler win the IWGP World Championship would be a great twist. And while Tanahashi being a New Japan wrestler does limit his availability, let's remember we don't have to keep him as champion for all that long. Now yes, that is dependent on how long CM Punk is going to be out for, but also remember that AEW doesn't have pay-per-views as frequently as WWE, and therefore Tanahashi can be used a little more sparingly. I just think having both world championships on the other promotion would be a great swerve, and it would do a lot to really sell the idea of this being a cross-promotional show. And now it's time for the main event, and no, I'm not going with a title match because I don't want to give either title top billing. Instead, let's go with a completely neutral matchup between, well, who else are we going to pick from New Japan other than the Rainmaker, Kazuchika Okada? Because as far as I'm concerned, the main event of this show just has to go to him, especially considering that he's New Japan's biggest star. But with that being said, he has to go against AEW's biggest star. Only problem is, all of those guys are injured. Or they're not being used, like MJF. As the Rainmaker going against Maxwell Jacob Freeman would be the biggest match on this show for me. But let's just come back down to earth and remember that MJF, for all intents and purposes, is persona non grata, much to my dismay. So instead, out of all my available options for the main event, I think we have to go back to the OG World Champion of AEW and put Okada against Chris Jericho. Now, I know that these two have gone against each other before, but as far as legend versus legend goes, I think this is our best possible option. But while that might be the best that we could do under the circumstances, let's remember we still have that ideal dream card to work with. And with that being said, let's get into that. Okay, so now for this card where everybody's healthy, we do have a couple matches that will be staying on. Namely, Haruki Goto versus Keith Lee, Togi Makabe taking on Eddie Kingston, Zack Sabre Jr. versus Claudio Castagnoli, Minoru Suzuki versus Hook, and FTR winning the IWGP Tag Team titles. But that's only half the card, as we still have a few new matches to consider. Now, the first match that I'm adding to this Dream Card pay-per-view is another brawl between Tomohiro Ishii, who was injured right before the show, and, well, I have a few options, as I would love to see a match between Ishii and Miro, but as hard as it is to choose, if I could only pick one opponent, well, I would have to go with Samoa Joe. Joe versus Ishii is a hard-hitting, dare I say, slobber knocker that just has to happen. And I have absolutely no doubt that if both men were healthy, they would probably walk away as one of the best matches of the night. Now, something that's missing from the actual pay-per-view and the previous card that I just talked about is something that's really psychological in nature, and for that, I would love to see Malachi Black take on the injured Tetsuya Naito. Just imagine the cerebral kind of bout that these two would put on, especially since both of them are really good at ring psychology. Oh, and in this ideal scenario, the IWGP World title is leaving the waist of Jay White and going around the waist of MJF. Next up, believe it or not, I'm not putting him in the main event, but I am taking CM Punk. And who's he going against? Well, I think there's someone who owes him a little bit of a receipt in the world of kayfabe, and that's Kenta. Seeing a battle of the GTSs is something that I just wouldn't be able to pass up, especially in a Forbidden Door pay-per-view that's featuring New Japan going against AEW. I mean, the booking's right there. Now, you might be wondering, if CM Punk was healthy and I had him going against Kenta, then what about Tanahashi? Well, I would like to see him go against Bryan Danielson. While I did mention that for me personally, I don't think that Tanahashi and Moxley are the best possible combination stylistically, I do feel that Tanahashi and Daniel Bryan are. Both men's methods will work really well to put on an absolute clinic, one that I think we'll be examining for years to come. Additionally, I also want to say that if this booking was up to me, there are a lot of things I would also change too leading up to the card, specifically that Bryan wouldn't be involved in any hardcore matches, especially considering his history. And besides, it's not like a lot of fans have been clamoring to see Bryan Danielson do hardcore wrestling when he's a technical marvel. Quite frankly, the risk just isn't worth the reward. And now it's time for the main event, and if everybody was healthy, I think there's just one match that you have to use as the centerpiece of this entire cross-promotional pay-per-view, and that's Kazuchika Okada versus Kenny Omega. And yes, I understand that these guys have wrestled each other a lot, and not everybody, including myself, thinks they're the greatest matches of all time, but you have to admit that for both companies' fan base, this is the stuff of legend. When it comes to show business, you just have to know your audience, and with this audience, there is no other match that could possibly be as big, as marquee, and as much of a draw as these two going at it one more time. Especially considering that American fans never got to see the two go at it live, even though I was supposed to at the G1 Supercard show at Madison Square Garden, but what you gonna do? Well, there you go, Forbidden Door if I was booking it, but how would you book it? Let me know down in the comments, and please give this video a big thumbs up, and also make sure that you're subscribed to this channel. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to all my awesome Patreon supporters out there, and as always, Dave knows.